My sister has convinced our parents that I am troublesome and has had me locked out of the house. A year ago, I couldn't have imagined my family turning their backs on me, but now it has become a reality. It was all due to my half-sister, Katie. Katie was skilled at exaggerating and attracting attention, but I never thought her lies would ruin my life in such a way. She always monopolized the attention around her. Although we never got along since childhood, I have always tried to be a good sister. When I was 10, my mother remarried, and a few years later, Katie was born. She was always treated as special in the family, always considered right, and deeply loved by my mother and stepfather, Ben. Katie knew how to use her position to manipulate people and was aware of her talent to control others. However, I had no idea how far she would go. It all started with something trivial. Katie kept telling my mother and Ben that I was acting strange and staying out late at night fostering small grievances against me. At first, no one paid any attention, but as I started living alone and was navigating my future after graduating from university at 24, suspicions about me grew within the family. By the time I realized it, it was too late. One day, I got a call from my mother, who said in a tense voice, "Jenny, I need to talk to you. Can you come over?" I had no idea that walking into the living room at home would lead to the collapse of my life. Ben sat on the sofa with his arms crossed and a stern look on his face, while my mother looked determined. And there was Katie, looking innocent, hardly seeming like the person who had driven a wedge between me and my family. My mother started the conversation immediately. "I've heard from Katie," she said with a serious tone in her voice, and then pressed me, "I want you to tell me the truth. Are you using drugs?" The question was so absurd that I laughed. "What? No, I'm not doing drugs," I replied. "Why would you think that?" Ben stared at me and said, "Katie told us that she found drugs in your room last weekend when you stayed over." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. There was no way Katie had been in my room. "That's a lie." I denied it immediately, but Katie interjected with a look of feigned concern. "I really didn't want to say anything, but I've been worried about you, Jenny. Her recent behavior has been odd, so I had to talk to our parents," Katie said, as if she sympathized with me. I was so shocked that I couldn't speak, just staring at her. I had never touched drugs in my life, but it felt futile to say anything. Katie had already skillfully planted seeds of doubt in their minds. Watching my mother and Ben exchange glances, it was clear that they believed her story over mine. It may not matter that I had never done anything suspicious before, as Ben said. That's not all. Katie also mentioned that you've been associating with shady people. "And Jenny, are you selling yourself for money?" he asked. I was stunned that my parents, who had lived with me for years, would so readily believe Katie and suspect me of such things. I said, feeling angry. "Why don't you believe me when I tell you Katie is lying?" But it seemed like my words were hardly reaching them. Katie had set her trap well to frame me, and they had fallen for it. "Jenny," my mother said in a low voice. There seemed to be a desire to believe me, but the doubts did not disappear. "We really just want to help you. If you are truly struggling, we want you to talk about it." "I'm not struggling," I raised my voice, tears nearly spilling from my eyes. "Katie is lying." No matter how much I pleaded, Katie looked at me innocently, as if she was the victim. "I just didn't want you to get involved in something bad. I really just wanted to help. I don't want you to end up like a friend of mine who got caught up in bad things," she said. I couldn't even bear to look at her anymore. Ben stood up and said calmly, "That's enough, Jenny. We can't believe you unless you're honest. We love you, but we need to keep some distance." Keeping distance. That meant they no longer intended to accept me. That day, I left the house in a daze. Unbeknownst to me, Katie's lies had turned my family against me, even to the point of hostility, and I was at a loss for what to do. I considered calling my father, but he was too far away, so I gave up. If it had been my father, he surely would have believed me. However, Katie immediately began spreading rumors around town that I was a drug addict. The rumors spread quickly. Even my boss heard about it and told me he didn't want an unreliable person working for him, so I lost my job. My friends stopped contacting me, and I felt more alone than ever before. Katie's lies took away everything: my family, my job, and my reputation. I had fallen into her trap, and she was basking in the attention. Every time I tried to confront her, she twisted the facts, making me look like a person unworthy of respect. Eventually, I received a call from my mother, who told me never to come home again. "Jenny, it's better to keep a distance until you get help. I can't have you around." Think about Katie too. I had lost everything, yet Katie appeared to them as if she were the victim. I couldn't bear it any longer. I packed my things and moved to a new city, trying to start over, but I was already scarred. My relationship with my family had broken down, and I had no idea what the future held. Months passed, and every time I thought about contacting them, I couldn't forget how they treated me like a stranger that day. I couldn't forgive my mother, Ben, or Katie. However, as time passed, I started to wonder if there was another reason behind Katie's actions. What kind of person could so easily ruin someone's life and lie without remorse? Was it simply jealousy, or were there more complex issues within her? Regardless of the questions lingering on my mind, I continued with my life, and a year passed. I managed to regain a bit of what I had lost, but the sorrow of losing my family remained in my heart. It's unclear if they'll ever accept me again or see through Katie's lies, but one thing is clear: if they wish to rebuild a relationship with me, they'll need to face the truth of who Katie really is. I fought hard to survive even after what happened with my family. But things only continued to get worse. I tried to stay positive, but it wasn't easy. The betrayal from my family gnawed at me like a wound that grew more painful each day. Katie's deceit permeated my life, affecting me deeply. I not only lost friends and my job, but I also lost my sense of self-worth. I couldn't trust anything I once believed in, which led my mother to kick me out of the house. That was the greatest betrayal I had ever faced. The day my mother turned me away from the house is still vividly etched in my memory. I returned home and desperately tried to explain myself, but it was futile. I wanted to believe that if we could talk calmly, my mother would understand. I hoped that somewhere in her heart, the mother who once raised me still existed. She cheered at my soccer games, patiently taught me how to ride a bike, and always said, "Family comes first." I wished for that mother to come back to me one more time. However, as soon as I opened the door, I was enveloped by a tense atmosphere. Ben sat in the kitchen with his arms crossed, looking at me as if I were some despicable presence. As expected, Katie was nowhere in sight. Though I couldn't see her, I was certain she was nearby, eavesdropping and waiting for everything to fall apart. My mother stood next to the kitchen counter, and before I could say a word, her stern expression suggested she had already made a decision. "Mom, we need to talk," I said, trying to keep calm. "I just need you to listen to me for a bit." She didn't respond immediately, and the silence weighed heavily on my chest, pressing down on me. With each passing moment, I felt my heartbeat quicken. Finally, she sighed deeply and spoke. "Jenny, there's nothing left to discuss. I've given you chances, but nothing has changed." Her voice was cold. I replied, my voice trembling, "You're only believing Katie. Everything she's saying is a lie. Please, listen to my side of the story." My mother shook her head silently, her reaction piercing through me. "Enough. Katie has always been worried about you. But there's no evidence to prove that her words are lies." Anger erupted within me, and I could no longer hold it back. She's lying because she hates me. She wants everyone's attention and is making people look at her this way. I pleaded desperately, but my mother's expression remained unchanged, unwilling to listen to me. In a firm tone, she said, "This situation isn't good for either you or Katie. At least until you seek support, it's better for you not to come here. Get some help." Stunned, I asked in disbelief, "Are you seriously saying I need to seek help? I haven't done anything wrong, And I don't use drugs, let alone sell my body. It's all lies made up by Katie. Why do I have to leave the house because of her lies? I pleaded desperately, but my mother's eyes felt cold. I can't stand this oppressive atmosphere. Please just leave. I was dumbfounded by her words. Did my parents really believe Katie's lies over me? I felt as if all my efforts for the family had been for nothing, and it was suffocating. Without saying anything, I left the house and went to my friend Amy's place. She was kind and let me rest on her couch when I was tired. Though I was determined to start over, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being discarded. Every time I saw a family walking in the park or heard someone talk about their parents, my heart ached. I couldn't get Katie out of my mind. Because of her, all the people I cared about had turned their backs on me. Amy tried to support me, but it was hard for her to fully understand my suffering. One evening, as we sat on her small balcony, she suggested, "Why don't you call your parents?" But I knew too well that they had rejected me. Amy looked at me with sympathy, but I felt a hint of doubt in her eyes. She supported me, but unless one experiences it themselves, it's hard to understand how painful it is to be abandoned by family. Over the next few years, I tried to rebuild my life, but it wasn't an easy journey. The lies Katie had spread clung to me forever. In the new town, rumors about me never ceased. Every job application was rejected, and each rejection felt like being buried deeper in a coffin. People started seeing me as someone not to be trusted. Then, about 2 years after being kicked out of the house, something unexpected happened. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was working at a small cafe. I had finally found stable work as a barista, though it wasn't the dream job I had hoped for. But I needed to earn a living. As I was tidying up the counter, a man approached me. He looked familiar, but I couldn't remember where I had seen him. "Jenny," he called out hesitantly as I looked his way. He gave a small smile. "Do you know who I am?" "It's Chris," he said. He was someone Katie had dated a few years ago. They had broken up around the time she started spreading rumors about me. I wondered what he was doing here. I wanted to turn around and leave, but I politely returned the smile. "Long time no see, Chris. What brings you here?" He twisted nervously and ran his hand through his hair. "I know it's weird, but I wanted to talk to you. I'm not sure how to start, but I want to clear my conscience." I raised an eyebrow. "What do you want to clear up?" I asked. He sighed deeply, looking genuinely regretful. "Everything Katie said about you, the drugs, the prostitution, it was all lies." I was speechless. The situation suddenly felt very real. Chris looked down at the floor. "I'm sorry, I should have said something sooner, but I never expected her to do something like that. Katie has her own issues, and she was always jealous of you. I think that's why she did it." I listened intently, not wanting to miss a word. "She harbored animosity towards you," Chris continued. "Mostly because you're so put together and strong. She was always jealous of you. She wanted more attention from everyone, so she made you out to be the bad guy to get it. I wasn't privy to everything while we were dating, but she said these things after we broke up. She felt guilty. But there was nothing I could have done about it." I was confused. Katie had admitted that it was all lies, and Chris had known the truth all along. I demanded to know why he hadn't told me sooner when I asked. If only Chris had spoken up sooner. If only Chris had stopped Katie. My family could have known the truth years ago. I wouldn't have had to fall apart like that, I shouted. Chris murmured an apology in a soft voice again. I couldn't understand why my parents wouldn't believe me. Katie had the ability to make people doubt others. She even confused my own thoughts. I shook my head vigorously. All the pain Katie had caused was ultimately due to her jealousy. Because of it, I was driven out of my home by my mother and lost my job and family. Chris waited for me to speak, but I couldn't say anything. I couldn't even look at him. All that was left in my heart was anger. "Just go back," I said, turning my back to him. "Jenny, I'm really sorry." He apologized once more before leaving. I gripped the counter, desperately holding myself together under all the pressure. It was all born from Katie's jealousy, and her lies had shattered my life. Years had passed before I finally learned the truth, but what was the point of her lying now? Several years had passed since Chris exposed Katie's lies. Initially, I thought knowing the truth would resolve something, but it only made the old wounds ache. I had been living without my family, navigating my own life. I had started a sales job at a new workplace, and every day was fulfilling. I had also met someone who valued me for who I am, without the burden of my past. I met Paul through a mutual friend 2 years ago, and from the moment we started talking, everything felt right. He didn't pry into my family background or criticize my broken relationships. He understood me as I am. When Paul proposed, he had already become my everything. I felt as though my life was finally starting to come together. We planned a simple, intimate wedding, as a lavish celebration wasn't necessary for us. What mattered to us was building a new life together, a home free of lies and betrayal. Of course, life wasn't that simple. Since being kicked out of my home, I hadn't been in touch with my parents for years. I had cut off all ties, moved away, and even changed my phone number to block any communication. I had heard rumors through social media that my mother and Ben were looking for me, but I never made contact. Then, about 6 months into our wedding preparations, an unexpected email arrived. It was from my mother. I stared at the screen for a while before slowly opening the email. My heart was pounding. The email read, "Jenny, I have thought of you every day since you left. We have finally realized the mistake we made in choosing Katie over you. I can't express how sorry I am for everything that happened. I heard from a friend that you are getting married. I would love to see you as a bride. Please let me meet up with you and apologize for everything that has happened." My mother apologized for all her actions and wanted to mend our relationship. Then, one night, I talked to Paul about Katie, my mother, Ben, and how they had abandoned me when I needed them the most. I also told him everything about how, even after Chris's confession and learning the truth, I couldn't forgive them. Paul listened quietly, his face troubled, but he didn't force me to make any decisions. "You don't need to repay them," he said in a gentle voice. "I won't mind if you don't invite them to the wedding." I did have a lingering longing for the family I had lost. Even though I knew it could never be like before, I wanted my mother to be there on the most important day of my life. However, I struggled with whether I could truly forgive their actions. A week passed, and I finally responded to my mother's email. While I appreciated her apologies, I told her that the wounds were too deep for me to feel ready to return to how things once were. However, since I wanted her at my wedding, if she could understand that our relationship would be different, I was willing to invite her. But I had no intention of inviting Katie or Ben. That was something I couldn't compromise on. A few days later, a call came from an unknown number. I felt something and answered the phone. Jenny, my mother's voice sounded like she was about to cry. I said nothing and just waited for her to speak. "I read your email. I'm really happy that you're inviting me to your wedding," she said joyfully. She continued, "About the wedding, are you really not inviting Katie?" I felt my stomach turn. "I have no intention of inviting Katie to the wedding," I stated clearly. There was silence on the other end of the phone for a while. I could hear her struggling to choose her next words. "Jenny, Katie is your sister. I understand her actions have hurt you, but she is still family. She has grown up since then, regrets her mistakes, and wants to make amends." I could feel the anger that had been dormant inside me begin to stir. Her lies ruined my life. Yet you and Ben believed her without any doubt. I can't accept her showing up at my wedding and acting as if nothing's wrong. She heard my words and tried to persuade me again. This is a chance for us to rebuild our bond as a family. If you don't invite Katie to the wedding, then I can't attend either. It would be unfair. I was shocked that she was using the wedding as leverage to press me to forgive Katie. "Are you serious?" I asked, my voice trembling with disbelief. I am serious, Jenny. I truly love you and want to be by your side. But I can't ignore Katie. She's my daughter too. I felt nauseous. So, you're choosing her over me again? I asked angrily. After everything that has happened, you're still on her side. She tried desperately to explain that it wasn't about taking sides. This was a family issue, and everyone needed to cooperate. No, I replied coldly, and continued. When I needed you, you weren't there for me. I've finally found happiness on my own, and now you're trying to ruin that too. She claimed we could start over. No, we can't, I said, and ended the call. My hand was trembling as I held the phone, and tears welled up in my eyes, but I did not cry. I didn't want my mother or Katie to ruin this special day. I had lived desperately to get to this place. In the months leading up to the wedding, I awaited my marriage with a mix of bitterness and love. I tried to focus on positive things. I spent time with my maid of honor Rachel, deciding on the menu, choosing flowers, and finding the perfect dress. Paul was always there for me, never pressuring me to invite my mother or Katie. We were building a future beyond past troubles. But as the day approached, I couldn't help but think about my family. That weighed heavily on my heart. I thought my father, being far away, wouldn't be able to come. Moreover, we weren't close anymore. Although I didn't blame him for trying to remain neutral during the issues with Katie, distance had grown between us over time. On the night before the wedding, Rachel threw a party to celebrate my last night of freedom. Close friends gathered, we laughed over wine for hours, and I truly enjoyed myself. The wedding day was enveloped in a gentle warmth. Standing at the altar with Paul, surrounded by friends and his family, I felt happy. I was sure of my choices. My mother and Katie were not there, but I didn't feel the weight of their absence, rather, my heart felt lighter. Even without their approval, I had moved on. Finding happiness with my new family was enough for me. As I exchanged vows with Paul, I was not thinking about forgiving or reconciling with anyone else. I was reaffirming the happiness I had chosen for myself. I felt a peace I hadn't known for years as I stood at the altar. However, about 2 months after the ceremony, I received a call from an unknown number. I didn't answer, letting it go to voicemail, but the message I heard sent a chill through me. It's Ben. Please call back. Katie has attempted suicide and is hospitalized. We need you. Please, I'm begging you. I paused to think. This wasn't my responsibility, and Katie had chosen her own path. I didn't need to take responsibility for her actions. Still, I couldn't shake off that Ben had reached out, pleading for my help. I listened to the voicemail again, trying to detect the emotions in his voice. Was it desperation or fear? When I got home, Paul was preparing dinner in the kitchen. I told him about the voicemail. Ben called, I said, as calmly as possible. Katie has attempted suicide and is hospitalized. Paul stopped what he was doing and looked at me worriedly. Did Ben say anything else? Is Katie okay? I don't know the details. He just said she's hospitalized and was desperate for me to come. Then, wiping his hands with a towel, Paul came over to me and hugged me gently. What are you going to do? I don't know if I should go, I replied. Paul said in a soft tone, Jenny, you don't owe them anything. Katie made her own choices, and so did your family. You don't need to feel responsible. That night, I lay awake, haunted by the years of Katie's lies and manipulation, and how my mother had repeatedly chosen her over me. Could I really face the past again? After much thought, I decided not to go to the hospital. Paul supported me, but he asked with concern, Are you sure about this? He also said he wanted me to choose a path I wouldn't regret. I told myself. Katie chose this for herself. I've spent too much time fixing problems that aren't my fault because of guilt. I don't want to visit them because of that guilt. And so, I didn't return Ben's call or go to the hospital. I chose to protect my own peace. A few weeks later, I received another call, this time from my mother. It was the first time I'd heard her voice since our conversation before the wedding. "Jenny, it's your mom. I think you're still angry. But Katie is really trying hard in rehab. If you visited, it would motivate her even more. She is reflecting on herself and wants to make amends. I know I keep asking you, and I'm sorry, but I hope you can support her as family." After listening to the message, I deleted it immediately. Katie was in rehab, and according to my mother, acknowledging her actions, but I felt I shouldn't accept those words. I vowed not to fall into that trap again. Katie had manipulated people for years. Even if she was trying to make amends now, the things she had done to me wouldn't just disappear. The scars from her actions, and the fact that my family had abandoned me when I needed them most remained unchanged. Calls continued to come in from them afterward. Ben left a long message on voicemail, filled with his feelings about Katie's situation and their desire to start over as a family. My mother also sent emails asking me to visit Katie at the rehab facility, pleading with me to give her a chance to make amends, but I never responded. I had already made up my mind. Months after Katie's suicide attempt, I unexpectedly ran into Chris. He looked surprised and said, "I didn't expect to meet you here." I managed to smile, though I felt a bit uneasy. It had been a long time since I had seen him after hearing about Katie's lies from him. Now that everything had settled, it felt strange to face him. "Yeah, I was just out with my husband," I replied, nodding slightly towards Paul, who was watching us from a cafe table. Chris paused before continuing. "I don't mean to intrude, but do you know about Katie?" I tensed up at his words. I was tired of hearing about Katie's rehab. He continued talking, not minding my cool demeanor. "She's really trying to change. She understands the pain she caused you, but she's admitting everything and now facing herself." "Chris, please don't." I interrupted him. My voice was calm. "It's good she's getting help, but it's no longer my concern. I'm looking forward." Chris looked at me with a mix of sympathy and sadness. "I understand. But people can change. Katie is really trying to make amends now." "Sorry, but I'm not interested in her amends," I replied sharply, unable to hold back any longer. "I don't owe her anything. Do you understand how much her lies hurt me? So no, I'm not interested in repairing anything with her now." Chris seemed to finally understand that I had no intention of accepting her back. "I just wanted you to know about her," he said before leaving. Paul watched him go, then turned back to me. "Are you okay?" I nodded slowly. "I just want to cherish our life together." As time went on, the calls and messages from my mother and Ben became less frequent. Now I have my own family, and together with Paul, I lead a fulfilled life. Eventually, the calls stopped altogether. My mother and Ben must have realized that I had no intention of returning. It seemed Katie also understood that she could not mend our relationship, and I decided to move on with my life without looking back.